Good evening. Welcome to good evening. Welcome to day 22 of the International Great Black Read Aloud Day. We are thankfully not borrowing time. If I read well, we're not borrowing time from another time zone tonight. And we're here before midnight, which is good. So it is day 22. And our subject for today here at the International Great Black Read Aloud Day is contemporary literature. And that is a literature that is anytime after World War II. And so that could be anything written after that time period. And so we have a selection tonight, which we believe you will enjoy. And before we get to that, we're going to talk about what you can do. And that is you can subscribe right down there. You can subscribe to greatblackreadaloudday.org, our website, and follow us on social media at Black Read Aloud and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is the International Great Black Read Aloud Day. And so we are going to read tonight, and I think you'll enjoy it. So today, our subject is contemporary literature, and our selection is the African Trilogy by Chinua Achebe. Okay, and the book is comprised of three books, which is Things Fall Apart, which is one of his very first ones, and Arrow of God, and No Longer at Ease. And so we are going to read from No Longer at Ease tonight. Again, our selection for today for contemporary literature, which is day 22, is Chinua Achebe. And I'm going to go to our selection, No Longer at Ease, and we are going to read from chapter 1. And it reads, for 3 or 4 weeks, Obi Okonkwo had been steeling himself against this moment, and when he walked into the dock that morning, he thought he was fully prepared. He wore a smart Palm Beach suit and appeared unruffled and indifferent. The proceedings seemed to be of little interest to him, except for one brief moment at the very beginning when one of the counsel had gotten into trouble with the judge. This court begins at 9 o'clock. Why are you late? Whenever Mr. Justice William Galloway, judge of the High Court of Lagos and the Southern Cameroons, looked at a victim, he fixed him with his gaze as a collector fixes his insect with formalin. He lowered his head like a charging ram and locked over his gold-rimmed spectacles at the lawyer. I am sorry, Your Honor, the man stammered. My car broke down on the way. The judge continued to look at him for a long time. Then he said very abruptly, all right, Mr. Adeyemi, I accept your excuse, but I must say I'm getting sick and tired of these constant excuses about the problem of locomotion. There was suppressed laughter at the bar. Obi Okonkwo smiled and waned, and Ashley smiled and lost interest again. Awan and Ashley smiled and lost interest again. Every available space in the courtroom was taken up. There were almost as many people standing as sitting. The case had been the talk of Lagos for a number of weeks, and on this last day, anyone who could possibly leave his job was there to hear the judgment. Some civil servants paid as much as 10 shillings and 6 pence to obtain a doctor's certificate of illness for the day. Obi's listlessness did not show any signs of decreasing, even when the judge began to sum up. It was only when he said, I cannot comprehend how a young man of your education and brilliant promise could have done this, that a sudden and marked change occurred. Treacherous tears came into Obi's eyes. He brought out a white handkerchief and rubbed his face, but he did it as people do when they wipe sweat. He even tried to smile and belie the tears. A smile would have been quite logical. All that stuff about education and promise and betrayal had not taken him unawares. He had expected it and rehearsed this very scene 100 times until it had become as familiar as a friend. In fact, some weeks ago when the trial first began, Mr. Green, his boss, who was one of the Crown witnesses, had also said something about a young man of great promise, and Obi had remained completely unmoved. Mercifully, he had recently lost his mother, and Clara had gone out of his life. The two events following closely on each other had dulled his sensibility and left him a different man, able to look words like education and promise squarely in the face. But now, when the supreme moment came, he was betrayed by treacherous tears. Mr. Green had been playing tennis since 5 o'clock. It was most unusual. As a rule, his work took up so much of his time that he rarely played. His normal exercise was a short walk in the evenings, but today he had played with a friend who worked for the British Council. After the game, they retired to the club bar. Mr. Green had a light yellow sweater over his white shirt, and a white towel hung from his neck. There were many other Europeans in the bar, some half sitting on the high stools, and some standing in groups of twos or threes, drinking cold beer, orange squash, or gin and tonic. I cannot understand why he did it, said the British councilman thoughtfully. He was drawing lines of water with his finger on the back of his mist-covered glass of ice-cold beer. I can, said Mr. Green simply. What I can't understand is why people like you refuse to face facts. Mr. Green was famous for speaking his mind. He wiped his red face with a white towel on his neck. The African is corrupt through and through. The British councilman looked at him furtively, more from instinct than necessity, for although the club was now open to them technically, few Africans went to it. On this particular occasion, there was none, except of course the stewards who served unobtrusively. It was quite possible to go in, drink, sign a check, talk to friends, and leave again without noticing these stewards in their white uniforms. If everything went right, you did not see them. They are all corrupt, repeated Mr. Green. I'm all for equality and all that. I, for one, would hate to live in South Africa, but equality won't alter facts. What facts? Asked the British councilman, who was relatively new to the country. There was a lull in the general conversation, as many people were now listening to Mr. Green without appearing to do so. The fact that over countless centuries, the African has been the victim of the worst climate in the world and of every imaginable disease. Hardly his fault, but he has been sapped mentally and physically. We have brought him Western education, but what use is it to him? He was interrupted by the arrival of another friend. Hello, Peter. Hello, Bill. Hello. Hello. May I join you? Certainly. Most certainly. What are you drinking? Beer? Right. Steward, 1 beer for this master. What kind, sir? Heineken. Yes, sir. We were talking about this young man who took a bribe. Oh, yes. Somewhere on the Lagos mainland, the Umufono Progressive Union was holding an emergency meeting. Umufo is an Igbo village in eastern Nigeria and the hometown of Obi Okonkwo. It is not a particularly big village, but its inhabitants call it a town. They are very proud of its past when it was the terror of their neighbors before the white man came and leveled everybody down. Those Umufoians, that is the name they call themselves, who leave their hometown to work in towns all over Nigeria regard themselves as sojourners. They return to Umufoya every 2 years or so to spend their leave. When they have saved up enough money, they ask their relations at home to find them a wife, or they build a zinc house on their family land. No matter where they are in Nigeria, they start a local branch of the Umufoya Progressive Union. In recent weeks, the union had met several times over Obi Okonkwo's case. At the first meeting, a handful of people had expressed the view that there was no reason why the union should worry itself over the troubles of a prodigal son who had shown great disrespect to it only a little while ago. We paid £800 to train him in England, said one of them. But instead of being grateful, he insults us because of a useless girl. And now we are being called together to find more money for him. What does he do with his big salary? My own opinion is that we have already done too much for him. This view, although accepted as largely true, was not taken very seriously. For as the president pointed out, a kinsman in trouble had to be saved, not blamed. Anger against a brother was felt in the flesh, not in the bone. And so the union decided to pay for the services of a lawyer from their funds. But this morning, the case was lost. That was why another emergency meeting had been convened. Many people had already arrived at the house of the president on Maloney Street and were talking excitedly about the judgment. I knew it was a bad case, said the man who had opposed the union's intervention from the start. We are just throwing money away. What do our people say? He that fights for a ne'er-do-well has nothing to show for it except a head covered in earth and grime. But this man had no following. The men of Umufoya were prepared to fight to the last. They had no illusions about Obi. He was, without a doubt, a very foolish and self-willed young man. But this was not the time to go into that. The fox must be chased away first. After that, the hen might be warned against wandering into the bush. When the time for warning came, the men of Umufoya could be trusted to give it in full measure, pressed down and flowing over. The president said it was a thing of shame for a man in the senior service to go to prison for 20 pounds. He repeated 20 pounds, spitting it out. I am against people reaping where they have not sown. But we have a saying that if you want to eat a toad, you should look for a fat and juicy one. It is all lack of experience, said another man. He should not have accepted the money himself. What others do is tell you to go and hand it to their houseboy. Obi tried to do what everyone does without finding out how it was done. He told the proverb of the house rat who went swimming with his friend the lizard and died from cold. For while the lizard's scales kept him dry, the rat's hairy body remained wet. The president, in due course, looked at his pocket watch and announced that it was time to declare the meeting open. Everybody stood up and he said a short prayer. Then he presented 3 cola nuts to the meeting. The oldest man present broke one of them, saying another kind of prayer while he did it. He that brings cola nuts brings life, he said. We do not seek to hurt any man, but if any man seeks to hurt us, may he break his neck. The congregation answered, Amen. We are strangers in this land. If good comes to it, may we have our share. Amen. But if bad comes, let it go to the owners of the land who know what gods should be appeased. Amen. Many towns have 4 or 5 or even 10 of their sons in European posts in this city. Umufoya has only 1. And now our enemies say that even that one is too many for us. But our ancestors will not agree to such a thing. Amen. And only palm fruit does not get lost in the fire. Amen. Obi Okonkwo was indeed an only palm fruit. His name was Obiajulu. The mind at last is at rest. The mind being his father's, of course, who, his wife having borne him 4 daughters before Obi, was naturally becoming a little anxious. Being a Christian convert, and in fact a catechist, he could not marry a second wife. But he was not the kind of man who carried his sorrow on his face. In particular, he would not let the heathen know that he was unhappy. He had called his 4th daughter, Niwidiana. A girl is also good, but his voice did not carry conviction. The old man who broke the cola nuts in Lagos and called Obi Okonkwo an only palm fruit was not, however, thinking of Okonkwo's family. He was thinking of the ancient and warlike village of Umufoa. 6 or 7 years ago, Umufoyans abroad had formed their union with the aim of collecting money to send some of their brighter young men to study in England. They taxed themselves mercilessly. The first scholarship under this scheme was awarded to Obi Okonkwo 5 years ago, almost to the day. Although they called it a scholarship, it was to be repaid. In Obi's case, it was worth 800 pounds to be repaid within 4 years of his return. They wanted him to read law so that when he returned, he would handle all their land cases against their neighbors. But when he got to England, he read English. His self-will was not new. The union was angry, but in the end, they left him alone. Although he would not be a lawyer, he would get a European post in the civil service. The selection of the first candidate had not presented any difficulty to the union. Obi was an obvious choice. At the age of 12 or 13, he had passed his standard 6 examination at the top of the whole province. Then he had won a scholarship to one of the best secondary schools in eastern Nigeria. At the end of the 5 years, he passed a Cambridge school certificate with distinction in all 8 subjects. He was, in fact, a village celebrity, and his name was regularly invoked at the mission school where he had once been a pupil. No one mentioned nowadays that he had once brought shame to the school by writing a letter to Adolf Hitler during the war. The headmaster at the time had pointed out, almost in tears, that he was a disgrace to the British Empire, and that if he had been older, he would surely have been sent to jail for the rest of his miserable life. He was only 11 then, and so got off with 6 strokes of the cane on his buttocks. Obi's going to England caused a big stir in Umuofia. A few days before his departure to Lagos, his parents called a prayer meeting at their home. The Reverend Samuel Ikedi of St. Mark's Anglican Church, Umuofia, was chairman. He said the occasion was the fulfillment of the prophecy. The people which sat in darkness saw a great light, and to them which sat in the region and shadow of death, to them did light spring up. He spoke for over half an hour. Then he asked that someone should lead them in prayer. Mary at once took up the challenge before most people had time to stand up, let alone shut their eyes. Mary was one of the most zealous Christians in Umuofia and a good friend of Obi's mother, Hannah Okonkwo. Although Mary had lived a long way from the church, 3 miles or more, she never missed the early morning prayer which the pastor conducted at cockcrow, in the heart of the wet season or the cold harmattan. Mary was sure to be there. Sometimes she came as much as an hour before time. She would blow out her hurricane lamp to save kerosene and go to sleep on the long mud seats. "Oh, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob," she burst forth, "the beginning and the end. Without you, we can do nothing. The great river is not big enough for you to wash your hands in. You have the yam and you have the knife. We cannot eat unless you cut us a piece. We are like ants in your sight. We are like little children who only watch their stomach when they bathe, leaving their back dry." She went on and on, reeling off proverb after proverb and painting picture after picture. Finally, she got round to the subject of the gathering and dealt with it as fully as it deserved, giving, among other things, a life history of her friend's son, who was about to go to the place where learning finally came to an end. When she was done, people blinked and rubbed their eyes to get used to the evening light once more. They sat on long wooden forms, which had been borrowed from the school. The chairman had a little table before him. On one side sat Obi in his school blazer and white trousers. 2 stalwarts emerged from the kitchen area, half bit with a gigantic iron pot of rice which they carried between them. Another pot followed. 2 young women then brought in a simmering pot of stew, hot from the fire. Kegs of palm wine followed, and a pile of plates and spoons, which the church stocked for the use of its members at marriages, births, deaths, and other occasions such as this. Mr. Isaac Okonkwo made a short speech placing this small cola before his guests. By Umuofia standards, he was well-to-do. He had been a catechist of the Church Missionary Society for 25 years and then retired on a pension of £25 a year. He had been the very first man to build a zinc house in Umuofia. It was therefore not unexpected that he would prepare a feast. But no one had imagined anything on this scale, not even for Okonkwo, who was famous for his open-handedness, which sometimes bordered on improvidence. Whenever his wife remonstrated that his thriftlessness, remonstrated against his thriftlessness, he replied that a man who lived on the banks of the Niger should not wash his hands with spittle, a favorite saying of his father's. It was odd that he should have rejected everything about his father except this one proverb. Perhaps he had long forgotten that his father often used it. At the end of the feast, the pastor made another long speech. He thanked Okonkwo for giving them a feast greater than many a wedding feast these days. Mr. Ikedi had come to Umuofia from a township and was able to tell the gathering how wedding feasts had been steadily declining in the town since the invention of invitation cards. Many of his hearers whistled in unbelief when he told them that a man could not go to his neighbor's wedding unless he was given one of these papers on which they wrote RSVP, rice and stew very plenty, which was invariably an overstatement. And that is our reading from No Longer at Ease, part of the trilogy from Chinua Achebe, which is our selection today for contemporary literature, which is literature that is written after World War II. And so the first one of this trilogy, as we told you earlier, is Things Fall Apart, and then Arrow of God, and No Longer at Ease. And it is the story of multiple generations in a family in Nigeria. And so you are listening to the International Great Black Read Aloud Day 2022. It is day 22, which is contemporary literature. And our selection today has been the African Trilogy. And we hope you have been enjoying our readings, and we know that we have been coming on late. It has just been extremely busy, and we keep trying to get here earlier. We haven't been making it. And so we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, a bit earlier tomorrow, for day 23, which our topic is, and we'll let you know what that is. And our topic tomorrow is marriage. And so tomorrow is day 23, and we have just a few more days. We have 6 more days to go here at the International Great Black Read Aloud Day. And we are excited about all that we are doing here at the International Great Black Read Aloud. And we hope that you have been truly enjoying the readings that we have had this year. And so we will see you tomorrow. Have a good night or have a wonderful day, whatever time it is in your time zone, whatever part of the world you're in. We want to thank you for listening to the International Great Black Read Aloud Day 2022, where we are giving voice to words written by Black people all around the world. Have a wonderful night.